Well, welcome everyone to our next Conversations at Work event. And this is our third one, and I'm really excited to host yet another engaging conversation. We've had two others already take place, and each of them have been different, so I'm sure that today is going to be unique as well. So I'm Bev Atfield. I'm the Principal of Workplace Science at Jostle. Jostle is the creator of an employee intranet, and we are out to help people feel more connected and engaged with work. And while we're doing that, we're having these types of conversations to understand how we can help every individual have a better day at work. And our topic today on Conversations at Work, which is always focused on the power of voice at work, is about listening. And I'm sure that Oscar is going to share some pretty alarming stats with us a little bit later, but it's pretty alarming how little we actually listen and how many of us think that we're actually better listeners than we are. And that has some pretty detrimental effects in the workplace. So I'd love to start by introducing our guests. First is Oscar Trimboli, and he is the founder of Deep Listening. Oscar has been a prior guest on our podcast, People at Work, and I've loved getting to know him and learning from him. So hi, Oscar. Great to have you with us all the way from Australia. And I'd also like to welcome Anna Straus, who is the co-founder and CEO of Sparck. And Sparck is based in California. And Anna is an employee, I like to call Anna an employee listening specialist. And I don't know, she might challenge me on that. But she and her colleagues at Sparck are creating a platform that really listens to and helps recognize people at work with the help of AI. So hopefully I got that right, Anna. Welcome. It's great to have you with us.
Excited about the conversation.
Awesome. Okay, so just a few tips around housekeeping. This is an open conversation. Anyone is free to chat. We are not talking at you today. We want to talk with you. And most of all, we want to do some listening today as well. So I'm really going to be focusing on an engaging conversation. Feel free to contribute in any way that you feel comfortable, as Oscar and Anna and I will be guiding the conversation. You can do that by using the chat tool. You can use the raise your hand tool. If you don't know how to do that, it's in the participants view, and you can go raise your hand, I believe. If I'm wrong, please somebody correct me on that. Or just unmute yourself and say, oh, hey, could I jump in here and give your thoughts on the matter? So please feel free to also just listen if that's what you'd like to do. Really, this is about being comfortable, enjoying this next hour that we have together, and taking away some things that we can put into practice right away. So that being said, I think that we are ready for a really engaging conversation. I was really delighted to see the comments ahead of the session that folks left when they registered, and some real action-oriented things that people are hoping to take away from today, like new thinking on how to really listen, and some deep listening tactics that you can take away and practice with your teammates, how to keep the communication loop going by both talking and listening, and employee retention and I guess how employees actually understand information, and then how do you turn your company into a group of people who are active listeners. So hopefully we're going to be able to answer some of those questions today. I think we will. So I think we're ready to go. So we're going to change things up a little bit in this session and try something new. So for those of you who have been to Conversations at Work before, this might be a little bit different. But we're going to start with an icebreaker, and we're going to send everyone into some breakout rooms. And we are going to talk about, in those breakout rooms, what poor listening does to relationships at work. So we really want to just have everyone maybe share we're going to have 10 minutes for this little side chat. So just talk about your own experiences of where you were at the receiving end of poor listening. Maybe you didn't listen as a leader in a one-on-one perhaps. So just think about different scenarios where you really thought you could have listened better, or someone else didn't listen to you, and how that actually made you feel. So because there are 11 of us on the call, I'm probably just going to do two breakout rooms. So let's get everyone ready to disperse into those rooms, and we'll come back here in about 10 minutes. And yeah, just have some fun with it. Okay, everyone's arriving back. I think we're all reassembled and reconfigured thanks to Zoom. Okay, so perhaps we'll just go around and have one person from each of the three groups just kind of give us a quick sense of like what were some of the common themes that were coming up around poor listening and how it makes us feel. So who was in breakout room number 1? Do you want to give us a quick overview? I think that was Oscar and Jaden.
I think Deepa would do a great job in summarizing.
Thanks, Oscar. Yeah, we kind of just dug a little bit into working with customers and just kind of making sure that that communication. So Oscar had an example of a previous workplace where, just making sure him and his team thought they were doing a great job of communicating to the customer, keeping them in the loop of what was happening while they were fixing their sort of technical issue. But I think Oscar got on a call with the client and realized, right, they weren't actually happy, and got an earful for about 20 minutes, I think. So yeah, he was just kind of describing that situation. Just, okay, it'd probably be better rather than email communication, kind of just do it over a phone call. But there was some interesting kind of, discovery there around that as well. And just, I think Faye, if you wanted to add a little bit more as well, what you were talking about when you were dealing with content sort of management.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, in a team setting, there's always that context and alignment and that opportunity to really clarify things. But in terms of, working one-on-one with a client, for example, there's room for misinterpretation or misunderstandings. And that's where really the listening comes into play, and also asking questions.
Awesome. Yeah. So what I'm hearing there as well is a lot around making assumptions that you think you're doing well, or you think you're listening well, but you've actually missed the mark. I'm sure that's a common occurrence. Thank you, Group 1. Group 2, anyone have any thoughts to share?
Yeah, I'd love to open it up to our group. I really enjoyed our conversation. Ashley, would you want to start with maybe some key takeaways from our talk?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Anna. Well, we started by talking about how Abigail mentioned that it's more of a process, and rather than an instance, we were kind of saying, well, actually that lack of listening where it's missing kind of goes on, and over time erodes the trust in the relationship, and it just dissolves the quality of the relationship. And so people get disengaged, and Abigail shared that that's the main reason she left a job, was for the lack of listening and what it led to in terms of her engagement. So we also talked a little bit about different personality styles. And, some of us have done those assessments, and, when you've got an introverted person who needs time to think through things and reflect, putting them on the spot and, for example, in the instance of a brainstorming session, you're not going to get their gold because they need time to think it through and process and verify and double check, because being wrong is very uncomfortable, and they absolutely won't go there if there's a risk of saying a wrong thing. On the other side, you've got those people that'll just throw stuff and see what sticks, and they love brainstorming. They're going to do all the talking, fill all the space, and the others won't have space. So it's also, a question of knowing your team and knowing, putting them in condition to be able to share so you can listen.
Actually, I'm curious there about what you see as the responsibility of the host in that context, as well as the participants, to stimulate and curate a really effective listening environment.
Yeah, I think that empathetic leadership requires that when you're setting up a conversation or a brainstorming moment or an event, that you do take into consideration the different styles of the participants to allow them. It's kind of like being a host. When you invite people to your home, and you've got a vegetarian, you're not going to only serve barbecued steak, right? You're gonna you want to welcome them and make them comfortable and provide them with, offer your hospitality. And so in the same way, leadership, I think, needs to also, be respectful and welcoming and open in that same way. So I think that, and sadly, we don't have all enlightened leaders everywhere. People are learning and growing still. So I think that when you say the shared responsibility, Oscar, I think that, we can lead up also. When we've got leaders who just don't get it, we can try and suggest different alternatives. Sometimes it'll work, sometimes it just won't.
Yeah. Something I saw done skillfully in a meeting that I've seen applied consistently in these really productive brainstorming meetings is giving people the opportunity to brainstorm by themselves first and then come into a group setting. It can be in the identical space, but it helps people process ideas. So, if somebody's very careful and they want to be right, maybe they're going to think more about the quality of the ideas, and they might come up with 3 or 4, whereas someone else might come up with 20 as well. So I'm just curious if you've got a story that brings to life when that brainstorming's gone poorly or gone really well.
Well, I think that when brainstorming goes poorly, you've got part of the group that is just disengaged and not listening. And I guess an example that I can give is when I facilitated a strategic planning meeting for a board of directors. I could see that, there was a group that was really pushing about, a program that they wanted to run, and they wanted to give it big budget allocation. And there were others that it was an opposing faction. So no interest whatsoever in contributing to creating that program. They just wanted that off the table. So yeah, that was not good. That was bad. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
Politics can come in. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's skip to group 3. Thanks, group 2. It sounds like you had a fairly rich conversation, and just emphasizing the role of leaders and how leaders set the tone for listening too. So thank you for sharing that. Group 3, what do you have to share with us?
Yeah, so we talked about the fact that you can learn a lot about the people you're working with just by listening to them. And if you don't listen to them, it makes them feel like unvalued and not loved. So just the simple act of listening to people makes them feel cared for.
Great. Anything else to add? I think Laurie and Laurie were in your group, right? Awesome. Well, I think some of the things, did you want to add something, Laurie? So what I'm hearing is, we've all
Ashley.
felt... Ashley wants to jump in.
You know what you made me think of was we touched on nonverbal, listening to nonverbal, and the sigh or the facial expression or the slumped shoulders, that's other elements to listen to and pay attention to.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And the eye rolling and, similar things like that really don't make you feel so good, right? So I think we've all felt the sting of poor listening and the disengagement and feeling undervalued and feeling that you're not cared for. So I'm going to hand it over to Oscar now. Thank you, everyone, for being game to split off and have a conversation in a smaller group. But I'm going to ask Oscar to help us now just quickly understand. So, we know what it feels like to not be heard and to not have people listen to us. But why are we so bad at listening then, Oscar, if we know that it's something that makes ourselves and others feel so bad? So perhaps you can give us a couple of minutes just on what's the science behind listening telling us.
Yeah, well, we just saw a beautiful example of the neuroscience of speaking and listening with Ashley putting her hand up. So I'm going to talk about that. So here's some numbers to think about. This is the neuroscience of speaking, and then I'll talk about the neuroscience of listening. So we speak at 125 words a minute, but we think on average at 900 words a minute. If you're in creative, collaborative, complex, problem-solving environments, you could be thinking at up to 1,600, 1,700 words a minute. So we have a mind that can process nearly 9 times more than what we can say. So if you just think about the maths of 125 words a minute out, 900 words a minute stuck in my head. You need space and you need time to get those other 125 words out. And if we didn't hear those 125 words just then from Ashley, we would have missed the whole point about nonverbals. But that couldn't take place unless there was a bit of space for Ashley to process it. And whether you are extrovert or introvert, labels are useful on jars. I'm not sure they're useful on people. And I think use a label when it's productive rather than as a judgment. So the maths and the neuroscience of listening says most of us are having dialogue with 11% of what everybody's thinking. And then we wonder why we're confused. We wonder why we deliver a project late. We wonder why the project that's delivered on time delivers to the wrong scope. So if you know the 125-900 rule, you'll just get better at these 3 questions. Tell me more. And what else? That question is called the AWE question, AWE, made famous by Michael Bungay Stanya, an Aussie who now lives in Toronto and one of the best leadership coaches in the world. And the last one is the most powerful, so use this very skillfully because this can be weaponized. This phrase is really powerful. In the West, they're not so skillful at using it. In the East and other high context cultures like Inuit cultures, Maori cultures, Polynesian cultures, jungle cultures, Aboriginal cultures, they use it really well. So here it is. This is the phrase. Listen carefully. Okay, I've got enough smiles that everybody's understood that you need to listen to the beginning and the middle and the end of silence and treat it like it's a word in a sentence. And if you do, you'll hear these magic code words coming back from people. And this is where the switch moves over, where the neuroscience connects a range of synaptic connections that weren't there before. People will say, you'll say, tell me more, or you'll say, oh, and what else? Or you'll just pause. And they'll do this. They'll go, well, actually, now that I've thought about it a little longer, what we should be talking about is this is a higher priority. Or, yeah, what's really important though, I know we've talked about that, but can we focus on this for the rest of the conversation? It's always preceded by a sigh. It's always preceded by this big breath out. And all of a sudden, the conversation changes direction, or this big light bulb goes on over people's heads. And that's because of the neuroscience of the speaker. Now, in listening, we're in a simultaneous equation, and we can speak at 125 words a minute, but we listen at 400 words a minute. And you can listen at up to 400 words per minute and maybe not necessarily retain comprehension. The science tells us that blind people can listen to audio books at 3 times speed and have complete comprehension. And a horse race caller or a cattle yard auctioneer that speaks at about this speed, you can completely understand them at about 200 words a minute. What it means is that you're distracted. Because we speak slower than what you can listen at, you fill in the gaps. In fact, you're doing it right now. You're thinking about what's coming up for dinner, or maybe you haven't had lunch yet and you're trying to figure out what you might do on the weekend. You're trying to figure out, oh, I wish I could go on holidays, but those fabulous holiday plans of going to New Zealand, and maybe they're out of your realm of possibility right now. But see how you got distracted just by me talking about New Zealand? And you built a picture of a holiday maybe you've been on or want to go on. And the difference between good listeners and great listeners isn't how well they listen, it's how quickly they notice they get distracted. And people who are really skillful listeners just notice they're distracted much faster. Here's the dirty little secret of listening, the final tip I will leave for all of you. As the listener, it's not your job to make sense of what the speaker's saying. It's your job as the listener to help the speaker make sense of what they're thinking. And if you can do that, you'll create transformational experiences for them, because you will get those extra 125 words out of them. And although people say it takes a little longer to listen, in the short, medium, and long terms, projects deliver more, they deliver them quicker, and they deliver to the scope that people actually want. So just remember, listening is not for you to understand what the speaker's saying. Listening is for you to help the speaker make sense of what they're meaning, what they are actually thinking in that time.
Thanks, Oscar. Let's pick up on that thread, Anna, and we'll slip into a more specific topic set, given the the context that Oscar has set for us. And I'd like to get your opinion on how people feel heard at work, and perhaps just reflect on anything that Oscar said that might have resonated with you specifically on the employee front. And we'll dig a little bit deeper into it in a second.
Yeah, so just to kind of continue off of what Oscar said, which I love those tips. Thank you, Oscar. I was writing them all down. But it is, the mind is a crazy thing. And when you think about listening, I actually related a lot to meditation. I don't know if anyone here has ever tried to meditate. It's one of the most difficult things in the world because your mind is constantly wandering. And so those same type of techniques have been really helpful for me to bring that into workplace listening. So you need to constantly be aware of those internal and external factors. So for example, right now we are all dealing with COVID. I am here in California. We have 387 fires taking place in the state. I'm looking out the window and there's ash coming down like snow. So there's those types of distractions. And then internally, like you were saying, Oscar, what are we having for dinner? What's the next topic going to be? So I think really having that awareness and creating a setting in place, just like you would for meditating, going into a conversation has been very helpful. As it relates to being heard, this is actually a topic I'm very passionate about, specifically when you're looking at engagement in the workplace. So research shows that employees that feel heard are 4.6 times more likely to feel empowered to perform their best work. So a lot of the pitfalls that we've seen within the workplace of employees not feeling heard, I'd say I'll break it down into three of the main ones that are the most consistent. The first is through surveys. So a lot of times companies will reach out and they'll facilitate a survey to get employee feedback, yet the company will never share the results or take action on the results. And when that becomes a continuous theme, as these surveys continually go out, participation will dip, responses won't be as transparent, and they'll lose that power of their employee's voice.
Hey, Anna,
yes.
I call that the balloon effect. Right? People have got to put balloons out to get responses to surveys. That's a dead giveaway that they're not taking action from the last survey. You know, those cheerleader emails, come on team, everyone fill in the survey. If you have to send those out, you're dead in the water. You're absolutely right. They're not taking action.
Absolutely. Another area too where we see it a lot is in performance reviews. where managers are meeting with their employees, they're asking about their goals for the year, you know, a lot of those standard questions, and then it's never talked about again. So if I'm sitting there with my manager and I'm telling them that my goal for this year is to purchase a new home, and we aren't talking about that again until the following review in December, do I really feel like I'm being heard, or do I feel like that was just a checkbox during that conversation? So really being intentional with what you're learning in those reviews and carrying out those conversations throughout the year will really help employees be heard. The last tip that I kind of have as it relates to this topic is, Ashley, you touched on it, is really the personality types. So a lot of times employees who may be introverted or not comfortable with sharing their thoughts or opinions in an open setting, it's really important to be able to personalize your strategies depending on who's on your team and creating different avenues of communication channels. So some people may love just a one-on-one conversation or a group conversation, or posing a topic the day before for them to kind of collect their thoughts and bring it to the meeting the next day. So those are just a few areas where we've seen a lot of success with our clients to help employees' voices be heard.
Yeah, I think you're just further reiterating what we heard coming out of the breakout groups there, Anna, just around how poor listening or not making your employees feel heard has these ramifications, right? People are feeling uncared for, they're not valued, they're disengaged. And I think as leaders, we need to be tuning into those cues that people are feeling disengaged and discontent. So maybe I'll put it out to the group and just let's look at this through the leadership lens for a few minutes. If anyone has some feedback around what do leaders need to be doing to be creating a culture of listening in an organization? If anybody would like to jump in here, please go for it. Just unmute and give us your thoughts.
I don't know if it relates exactly to that, but it certainly sounds from what the two of you are saying that listening goes a lot further than listening, in terms of just because you listen doesn't mean people feel heard. And you're picking up from what you were saying, especially Anna, the feedback on what you hear, which seems to me to extend beyond the listening to it, but rather the playing back of it and the sort of the recommunication of it, and then the action that's taken off the back of it, feels as important as a demonstration of listening as the listening was in the first place. Let's see if I can say the word listening as many times as possible within 1 minute as well as I speak here.
And here's a beautiful, simple distinction. The difference between hearing and listening is the action you take.
Yeah, I think listening really has to do with individual motivations. As leaders, you want to know how your employees like to work, their communication style, understanding them as a person through how they present themselves, and looking for clues on how to serve them, right? Like their motivations. And this also ties into the employee retention piece. If they feel heard, they'll likely, have that sense of belonging, want to stay and contribute and be their best selves. So I think listening really plays a part in the leadership lens.
Yeah, and one, oh, go ahead.
No, carry
on.
on.
The only thing I would add to that is I always, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was going to talk about the leader being also heard and listened to. So not just being the shepherd, but also, sharing that, being in that circle of vulnerability and sharing with the people that they are leading. So I think that's an important element from the leadership perspective, making sure that, they're not just a lightning rod.
Yeah, I was just going to add something similar to what you shared, Ashley, is having the leaders to define what belonging means to them, like what it means for them to feel heard, and what listening is for them. It's the same thing with trust or human connection and belonging. I always feel like if the leader is able to understand that for themselves, then they have empathy and compassion for what other people are experiencing. But if they don't even know what that is for themselves, or what others could do to make them feel heard, then it's hard for them to then bring that forward with their team.
And one of the things I've noticed is that managers listen to content and leaders listen for context. Leaders listen for patterns. Leaders listen for what's unsaid. And to make it even simpler, managers listen to what is being said and leaders listen to how it's being said. So one of the things skillful leaders will always do in team meetings particularly, but also in one-on-one dialogue, they'll reserve some time during the meeting, typically 10%, to say, how's this meeting going? How could we make it more productive? If we had our time all over again, what would we do differently? And that is role modeling listening to the group so you can make course correction in the moment. It's a very elegant way of doing the following. Could you give me feedback? That's really what those questions are about. But if you say, I'd really like some feedback on how I'm going, that sounds like it's all about you. Whereas if you ask a question, how could we make the balance of our time together more productive? That's asking a question at the how level, the context level. It's asking at a group level, at a systems level. So I think there's a big distinction between people who listen to things, like the content, versus people who listen for things, like the context, or listen for what's unsaid.
Yeah, I always say too, I think it's so powerful when a leader leads by example. So if this is someone who values listening, how are they structuring their team meetings? Are they coming and turning off their phone or silencing their phone? Are they interrupting other people when they speak? So really having that intention and value in the team, then that will kind of ripple throughout. One of the other things that I've been kind of looking into a lot is leaders that seek to understand have had such a more powerful response in when they're communicating with their teams. Oftentimes there may be confusion on what something means or a definition of what's being said. It's defined differently by each person and there's miscommunication. So it's interesting with the George Floyd case that took place in the US. Employee engagement dropped 7% in June. It's the biggest drop out of any other pandemic or national crisis that's happened. And so what was interesting is a lot of leadership teams we were dealing with, their employees were talking about systemic racism within the workplace. And so where there was a disconnect is the leaders were hearing, you think we're racist, whereas the employees were saying, no, let's build more self-awareness around what we're doing and our internal processes so we can move forward. But that blew up on multiple occasions just within the past couple of months. So I think really coming in to seek to understand and be curious is one of the most powerful things that you can do when you're listening to make sure everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Anna, and it's something that ties quite well into the next topic that I wanted us to huddle around, and that is how listening creates psychological safety. And you know, a lot of what we've talked about around leaders, how leaders show up, the climate and conditions that leaders create for listening to take place, and the curiosity that we bring to our workplaces and the environments that we're creating. Contribute to how safe people feel to voice their opinions and their ideas, and whether or not they feel that they can fail and be supported in those endeavors. And listening is critical to that, like, and feeling like you are listened to when you are sharing something that's new or interesting and uncertain is a very important part of the psychological safety that we should be creating in workplaces. So I don't know, does anyone else have any thoughts about listening in particular as it relates to psychological safety?
I think we've all been in meetings where it isn't safe to speak up because agendas are defined by statements rather than questions. So quite often one of the simplest things we can explore when we set up agendas, are we posing agendas as statements and outcomes, or are we creating a place of curiosity where we can safely explore those ideas with agendas that ask questions rather than necessarily agendas that do that? I was working with a finance organization inside a pharmaceutical company, and they were very frustrated that nobody was listening for the budget setting process. I know it's absolutely riveting, I said to them. The budget setting process is the most exciting time of the year for you, but it isn't for anybody else. And I said to them, what question could you pose in the budget setting process rather than saying, we will do version 1 of the budget this week, and then the week after that we will do version 2, and then we will do a revision and present it. And it was all very mechanical. And they came up with a really simple question. The question was, how could we improve the budget process? And they were knocked over by people feeling safe enough to speak up. People who'd been engaging with this budget process for years, for decades inside this organization, suddenly spoke up. And yet the budget they created together using the new process, they did it in record time with higher quality and immediate approval from their global head office. And I think sometimes it's simply the context we pose the question in. And a lot of us don't pose questions, and questions is one of the simplest ways to bring about psychological safety, as long as you ask how and what based questions. Too many of us start with why. Simon Sinek, we love him. He's been so fantastic in promoting his little child called Ask a Why. But when safety isn't present, why sounds really judgmental. So be careful about the kinds of questions you ask, because what and how based questions will definitely get you there faster than asking why based questions as well.
I think what you're raising there, Oscar, is also around something that we've talked a little bit about already, which is empathy and consideration of others in listening. And I think we can often be self-centered in our listening, and you're only listening for the things that either support your own opinion or that help further your own agenda or process or what you have to prioritize at that moment. So it is about being more considerate of others, which is also part of creating psychological safety, right? Is creating this very open environment that listening is a big part of. So.
Yeah, and we can play that game right now, because in the chat box right now, just write down, are you giving your attention right now, or are you paying attention right now? Giving attention is an act of generosity, it's an act of curiosity, it's an act of empathy. Paying attention feels like you've had to open your credit card up. It feels like that it's taxation. It feels like it's something you have to do. So right now in the chat box, are you giving attention or paying attention in this conversation? And I'm not judging the answer. I'm just curious where everyone's at. But it gives you an insight into whether your listening orientation is you yourself, giving attention, versus, paying attention. If your listening orientation is on the other, you're giving attention.
Maybe while folks are typing into the chat box, I'll take some advice from Oscar and I'll ask, how's this meeting going for everybody? What else should we do with the last 10 minutes of our time together? Do we want another breakout? Do we want to play a game? Do we want to test if we've actually listened today? Kidding aside though, is there anything that you think we should do better for next time, or that we could even switch up now to make the last 10 minutes even more meaningful?
I'm curious if you have, Oscar or Anna or anyone on the call, any listening techniques to just prepare. I know I heard one, I think it was Ashley, like maybe setting that intention before or maybe it was face, setting that intention before you go into the meeting that you're going to be fully present, there's no distractions. And so that, creating that environment and your full body so that you're ready for that conversation to be open and to listen. But is there any other technique going on in the world, or you prepare, but then something else comes up? I'm just thinking right now on the spot if there's anything else that you want to add.
Anna, do you want to go first?
No, I think for me, the ones that you touched on is really where I focus a lot of my time, is just looking at managing the internal and external distractions. And then also as a leader, setting up the expectations for the team meetings. So, not interrupting one another, turning off your cell phone, turning off the notifications on your computer, especially now within this remote world. One of the other areas too that we talked about is that Ashley brought up was the nonverbal communication. So one thing that we love to encourage is that everyone's on video when we are having those conversations, just to build more connectivity and be able to make sure that people are engaged. The other thing too that I've seen people do that I personally like is before they kick off a team meeting, they actually do a breathing exercise just to help everyone get present. So they'll breathe in for 4 and out for 4, and as a team, and it kind of brings everyone together and sets the stage for what's about to take place in that meeting.
Awesome tips. The most commented thing on the Google Geist, which is employee engagement survey at Google in 2015, was if there was a meeting of 6 people or more, they had a guided meditation for the first 6 minutes of the meeting. And that was the most commented on thing there. Laurie, just to your question specifically right now, in meetings like this, if you're running any kind of video conference that's going more than 15 minutes, I would suggest that at the 15-minute mark, and I've done this in so many meetings and got such amazing feedback from the groups, is to get everybody to switch off their webcams at the 15-minute mark, put their mics to mute, and reflect for the period for 2 to 5 minutes, 2 minutes if it's a 30-minute meeting, 5 minutes if it's a 1-hour meeting, and just pose the question, what aren't you listening to in yourself at this moment? And people come back into the room in a complete, their listening batteries have been recharged. Now, at first, it might feel awkward. At first, it might feel challenging, but it is an amazing way for people to reconnect. And by the way, the other hack is that as humans right now, our maximum listening in video-based conferencing, 8 to 12 minutes, the maximum we can hold attention for, 8 to 12 minutes. You need to mix the modalities up in that time. Go to a chat room, go to a breakout room, etc., etc. So tip number 1, give them a break. That will actually recharge their listening batteries. And then tip number 2, mix up the modalities as much as possible. And that in a group setting on a video context will make a difference. But notice how the energy's changed now that Bev's asked the question in the group.
Could you repeat that, Oscar? What are you listening to in yourself at this moment? Is that the question?
Yeah, that is it. Yeah.
Thank you so
And
much.
it could also be posed as, what are you not listening to in yourself at the moment also? It depends on the trust in the group and how long the group's been working together. But I think we could all use with a recharge of our listening batteries.
So I have a question about that, Oscar. When you do that with your groups and you give everyone a break and go off video and mute,
Yep.
and go away and think about what you're listening to and what you're not listening to, and then do you have a round of reporting, or is it just for people to reflect upon within themselves and then carry on?
Yeah, so I've done this in groups of 4 plus me, and I've done this in a group of, I think it was about 800 2 weeks ago in London. And I love how I travel the world at the moment. It's amazing. And you can, in the smaller groups, it may be useful to do audio playback. In the larger groups, I just ask them to write one word that describes their state. And I ask everybody to read this one word. And then what I ask the groups to do is thinking about your listening filters. Were you relating more to words that were similar to yours or different to yours? Because that's one of the techniques I'm teaching people to think about at a meta level when they're listening. We tend to be attracted to either differences or similarities depending on our listening filters. And it is an example why we play back is really important, Ashley. It's helping the group listen to itself. That's why that technique is being used. So we're not only having you listen to yourself as an individual, we're having the group listen to itself as a group. Because often leaders will come back to me and go, wow, a lot of people, so, you know, people will write anxious, people will write confrontational, people will write confused. And we help the leaders notice patterns because they rarely ask those questions with allowing people the time to pause and collect their thoughts and feelings. We often say, how are you going? So they get the first 125 words. There's a reason it's 2 minutes. I want to get to the next 125 words in your head and get that out. Is that helpful, Ashley? Awesome.
Okay, so we are quickly running out of time here, but I did want to just jump in with a comment that Faye had around, we've talked a lot today about leaders making feel people heard, but how do we as individuals give ourselves the voice and make ourselves feel heard? So maybe Anna, you could speak a little bit about, what are you seeing around the confidence and the ability that people have to actually speak up and speak out in workplaces?
Yeah, what I've seen as it relates to that is it's it's very dependent on the manager. So, and the relationship that's in place. So managers have about a 70% influence over their team's engagement. And so when that relationship isn't intact, it's very hard for people to let their voices be heard without kind of taking a stronger stance. So if someone is in a situation like that, where there isn't an existing relationship, then I always recommend talking with other people within other departments, friends, or other leaders that are within your organization to really share your ideas and let your voices be heard if one avenue isn't working.
Excellent, thank you. Does anyone else have a last 30-second parting advice that they'd like to throw on top of Anna's contribution?
I'd love everyone to put a numeric value in on a scale of 1 to 10. How useful was this as an hour of your time today? That would be a great way to get feedback and the tip that you might apply from today as well. What's one tip you might apply from today?
And thank you guys so much for sharing. I've learned so much within this hour as well, so thank you.
Well, while everyone is sharing their takeaway from today, I'll just start to wrap up and thank everybody for their time, and specifically Oscar and Anna for joining me as our hosts today at Conversations at Work. And I love where the conversation took us today because it sets us up perfectly for our next event, which is on September 3rd. And actually Laurie Bennett, who's on the call with us today, is going to be one of our guests at that event. And we're going to be talking about horrible bosses and how do we actually help leaders have stronger voices in workplaces so that we can get past horrible bosses and create spaces where leadership voices are strong and powerful and compassionate in the workplace today. So I hope you'll join us for that one. It's perfectly paired with some of the themes that came out of today's session. And yeah, I just hope that you took away some tips and thoughts that will help you not only improve your own listening, but help you perhaps look around you and see where you can help others in their listening, and in doing so, improve your teams and your organizations or customers that you might be coaching in this area. So thank you, everyone. Please do reach out to me. I'm bev@jostle.me if you'd like to share some feedback about today. I know that's a really blunt and inelegant way to ask for that, but there you go. And just thank you. Thanks for the time, and thanks for the contributions, and thanks for being part of this community. Much appreciated.